I mean, McGregor, he's the biggest star the sport's ever seen. So, he sold a lot of tickets. I think it was the highest gate the UFC's ever seen. So, he boosted the economy for the UFC and for Vegas. So good on him for doing that. The excitement, the electricity that he brings to a UFC arena, that can't be understated. So, McGregor's still a first ballot Hall of Famer and the biggest star the sport's ever seen. So I'm not going to kick him while he's down. I'm not going to be like, that fraud, Dustin Soy Boy, Louisiana Swamp Trash Poirier. I'm not going to kick him while he's down. Especially a guy that made Dustin's career. And he was giving Dustin great advice. He said, "Bro, like get this in control, otherwise your life's going to spiral out of control." You see Dustin, he's cussing at a cop.
There's a moment in every legend story where the crowd stops breathing, where the lights are blinding, the arena is deafening, and one man stands at the edge of history, ready to either reclaim it or lose it forever. That moment came in Las Vegas, and when it was over, the loudest star the sport has ever produced was on the canvas, his leg wrecked, his comeback shattered before it truly began. Nobody in that arena expected the night to end the way it did. They came for a coronation. They walked away witnessing a collapse. 5 years. 5 long years of waiting, of whispers, of doubt. 5 years since a leg snapped in half against Dustin Poirier, and the whole world wondered if the king was finished, whether the throne would simply sit empty forever. And then he came back. The ticket sales exploded. The gate broke records. Vegas transformed into a coliseum built for one man's return. Every seat filled with people who wanted to witness history with their own eyes. The energy was electric, the kind that only comes around once in a generation. The kind of buzz that no amount of marketing money can manufacture. And for a few fleeting seconds, walking to that cage under a wall of noise, it felt like the old days were back. It felt like the myth was real again. Then he threw the kick. It was wild. It was violent. It was everything people expected from him. And it was the beginning of the end. Something in his knee gave way in that split second. A sickening moment that silenced the roar of the crowd almost instantly. The fight unraveled in an instant. What was supposed to be a triumphant coronation turned into a nightmare, and the referee waved it off. A TKO. A brutal, gut-wrenching defeat delivered not by a punch, not by a choke, but by his own body failing him at the worst possible moment, in front of the biggest audience of his career. The fighting world erupted. Some mourned, some celebrated, some simply sat in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just watched unfold. And in the chaos that followed, voices from every corner of the sport rushed to have their say, each one trying to make sense of a night nobody saw coming. This is where the real story begins, not in the cage, but in what came after. Because when a legend falls, the vultures circle almost immediately, and one voice in particular refused to stay silent. Dustin Poirier, a man who has shared the cage with the fallen star 3 separate times, did not hold back. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer respect. He came out and called him a dirtbag, kicking a wounded man while he was still trying to process what had just happened to his body and his legacy. It was cold. It was calculated. And it did not sit well with everyone watching. For a man who built part of his own legend on their shared history, on trilogy fights that defined both of their careers, the timing felt almost cruel. There was no grace period. No moment of respect for an opponent who had just watched his comeback collapse in real time. Just cold words, thrown the moment the blood was still fresh. Enter a challenger with his own fight on the horizon. A man preparing to headline in Milwaukee against one of the most dangerous competitors on the roster. A man with his own reputation for speaking his mind without filter or fear. He had his own massive fight to prepare for. His own career-defining night, just days away. And yet, in the middle of his own training camp, with everything on the line for himself, he stopped to watch the pile-on happen. He watched the criticism rain down on a fallen icon, while the man could barely walk off his own injury. And he decided he wasn't going to be part of it. He called the injured star the biggest attraction the sport has ever seen. A first-ballot Hall of Famer. A man who single-handedly moved the needle for an entire promotion, who filled arenas, who turned casual fans into diehards, who made an entire city buzz with anticipation. He said the electricity that surrounds him cannot be measured, cannot be replicated, and should never be forgotten just because his body betrayed him on one violent night. But then things turned personal, and what started as a defense of a fallen champion became a full-blown attack on the man who dared to criticize him. He accused Poirier of being a fraud, of playing a nice guy for the cameras, while hiding something far uglier behind closed doors. And then he brought up something that had nothing to do with the cage at all, an arrest. A Father's Day arrest for public drunkenness that had already made headlines. An embarrassing spiral caught by police, complete with allegations of cursing at officers and hurling insults at people just trying to do their jobs. The accusation landed like a bomb. Here was a man calling out another fighter, not for what he said in an interview, but for who he claims to be when the cameras stop rolling. He painted a picture of hypocrisy. A man who preaches kindness and humility in public, but who allegedly becomes someone else entirely when nobody's supposed to be watching. He didn't just call him a liar. He called him a fake, a deadbeat, someone incapable of taking responsibility for his own mistakes, someone who blames his father instead of owning his failures. And then came the twist that nobody saw coming. He connected the dots between Poirier's public unraveling and the fallen star's injury, suggesting that the very chaos surrounding Poirier's personal life somehow tied back to the tragedy in the octagon. It was a wild, almost conspiratorial leap, but it captured attention instantly, because it reframed the entire narrative. This wasn't just about an injury anymore. This was about karma, about loyalty, about who truly deserves respect when the lights go out and the cameras stop rolling. He didn't stop there. He reminded everyone of the bond between the two men, a friendship forged years earlier when the injured legend reportedly gave Poirier guidance, warning him to get his life under control before it spiraled. It was almost prophetic, because months later, it was Poirier who spiraled, not the man he once looked up to. And now, in the aftermath of one man's crushing defeat, it was that same man defending him instead of turning on him. But even amid the storm of accusations and controversy, there was a quieter, more human thread running through it all, hope. Because despite the devastating end to the comeback, despite the surgery looming and the uncertainty hanging over his future, there is a belief that this isn't over, that the fire hasn't gone out, that somewhere beneath the wreckage of that night, a legend is already plotting his next move. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the noise, there's a process that always begins the same way for fighters like this. Grief first, then anger, then the slow, grinding return of purpose. Surgeons will assess the damage. Doctors will map out a timeline. And somewhere in that recovery room, a man who has already rewritten his own story once before will start asking himself the only question that has ever mattered to him. Not if he can come back, only when. He needs it. Not just for the sport, not just for the fans, but for himself. Fighting gives him structure. It gives him purpose. It's the one thing that keeps his world from spinning out of control. And so even in defeat, even with his body broken and his name once again the center of controversy, the belief remains unshaken. He will return. He always does. The question now isn't whether the story ends here. It's what comes next. Will he rise again, silence his critics, and remind the world why he became the biggest star this sport has ever seen? Or will this be the final chapter in a legacy defined by chaos, brilliance, and heartbreak in equal measure? One thing is certain, the world is still watching, and when he steps back into that cage, whenever that day comes, it will not be quiet. It never is, because some stars don't fade away. They explode, they crash, and somehow, against all odds, they rise again. History has a strange way of rewarding the ones who refuse to disappear, the ones who keep coming back, no matter how many times they get knocked down. And if there's one thing the sport has taught its fans over and over again, it is this. Never count out the man who has already proven he can rebuild himself from nothing. The story isn't finished. It's only just been interrupted.